Hey folks, thanks for stopping by. This is my budget Resto-Mod for my 1978 Suzuki TS-250, very cool bike, which I converted to a Scrambler style bike as you can see from the opening video. Now this is what the bike looked like when I first picked it up back in December of last year. Now when I originally picked up the bike, it was turning over but not running. The carb was not on the bike, it was in a separate parts bin. Had some electrical issues with the signal lights, the horn didn't work. But it did have all the parts. Most of the parts are actually on the bike. But there was a big bin of parts that the previous owner gave to me with the bike, which I was very grateful for. So I had all the parts when I started this and didn't have to go searching for some really rare parts. So when I first picked up this bike and started this project, I knew I wanted to make it a Scrambler style bike. But there were 4 specific reasons why I did this conversion the way I did it and why I did this video the way I did it. The first reason is I wanted to see how close I could get to the look I wanted and keep the budget extremely low. I mean, you can go nuts with aftermarket parts, right? I wanted to keep this budget very low, and I'll show you the whole budget at the end of the video. The second reason is I wanted to see what I could do with just tools that your average home hobbyist would have or high school kid would have in the garage without needing to buy special tools. So I did this whole conversion with just simple tools. I just used my hand power drill, my jigsaw, my table vise, some files, sockets, and wrenches and things like that that most people probably have in their garage. The third reason is really tandem to the second reason, and that is I wanted to see what I could do to get that look, the Scrambler look that I wanted, without having to cut the frame or weld additional tubing onto the frame. Again, because most home mechanics don't have that capability. And the fourth and final reason is I didn't want to cut the frame or weld anything to it because I wanted to keep this bike 100% original. Here are all the original parts: the fenders, the seat, the signal lights, and the tail rack and tail lights. And I saved these, pulled them off exactly the way they were, and saved all the hardware. So somebody who wanted to take this bike and put it back to the original Suzuki Enduro style could probably do this in a Saturday. So now that you know why I did what I did, let's get to it. So the first order of business was just to get the bike running, right? Check the brakes, put the carb on the bike and get it running. And I want to show you what I had to do here. So this is the carb throttle control with the cover taken off. And you can see it has a push and pull system here like a lot of bikes do. But I couldn't figure out what was going on with the carb. It wasn't working right. The throttle wasn't snapping back. And what I figured out was happening was somebody snapped this side of the throttle cable. This was broken inside the cable. So they took this side, put it over here so that you could turn the throttle, and they changed it up at the hand grip. They pulled the return cable off and they put it over here so that when you twisted the throttle it worked, but it didn't snap back nicely. But it also messed up the oil injector a little bit. It wasn't quite working, the oil injector valve, because this throttle cable splits off and goes to the oil injector, which is behind here. This is what the oil injector looks like with the cover removed. So you can see the second half of the cable coming down. It splits off from the throttle pull side, and one side pulls the throttle open, and this side opens the oil injector valve so that oil squirts into the engine as the throttle increases. So this is a little hard to see because it's already tucked up under the tank. But this is the part of my throttle cable that was broken. You can see we have one cable inside the jacket that comes down and it goes into this splitter, it goes into this yoke, and it comes out as 2. And this single cable pulls both of these at the same time. So it was the little small cylindrical shaped cable end that was broken in here. And the barrel shaped end that's over here in the carb, that needed to be reshaped. I only needed to replace the short side that went to the throttle open side. And I measured it, and it was about a 1 millimeter cable, and I had a leftover 0.9 millimeter mountain bike brake cable, which are plenty strong to handle the needs of the throttle open forces. So I put my own end on it using a mountain bike cable, some JB Weld, a little electrical connector, I'll show you how I did that, and just some paint thinner to clean the wire with here. So once you cut the cable to the right length, you need to trim down this end. This is the standard end of a mountain bike brake cable. It's about a 1/4 of an inch diameter, and it's way too big to fit into the throttle of the Suzuki. So I just put this in a vise and filed this down, and in about 10 minutes you can file it pretty well to the shape of the actual Suzuki smaller diameter that you need. This is the barrel end that I'm talking about. Once you file down the mountain bike brake cable, it fits right into this diameter here that's the smaller diameter in the red circle. That cable on the right hand side of that carb wheel is the whole cable that I made, and it works perfectly. So once the barrel end of this cable was filed to the right diameter, I just needed to attach the small cylindrical cable stop on the other end of the cable. So what I did was I just took the insulation off the terminal connector, and I measured this post is the same diameter as the end of the cable, the OD that needs to be on the throttle cable. With the pair of nippers, and you wind up with just the little cylinder of aluminum, and it's the perfect diameter to go on the end of this cable to make your replacement throttle cable. So you just take a pair of pliers, and you just take the very end and kind of use that to twist, and you open up and you unfray the cable just a little bit. I'll get that in focus. Just to expose each individual strand, and then you dunk that in some paint thinner just to clear off any grease, and tap it off on the towel. You make sure it's nice and dry, and that's how you get the end prepped for the terminal that you're going to put on with the JB weld. So while the wire is clean and dry now and it's still kind of unstranded a bit, you take a little of the JB weld just on a toothpick, and I kind of just jam it in between all the frays and strands of the wire. You can get it to go right down in there, in between all the layers, and get that all ready. And then the little bit of messiness of your hands, you can kind of restrand the wires, and the JB weld stays there. Then I take my connector, the piece that's going to become the cable end, and I put some JB weld right in there. Try not to make it too messy. Then you can kind of thread this on over the strands and kind of give it a good turn, and then you put some more JB weld on there. You really want to get it really strong, and then you kind of just go back and forth, put it behind it. You don't have to worry about being too clean here, because JB weld, once it dries, it's actually very easy to file and get to the shape you want. And in this case, where this isn't going to be seeing any fuel, you can use regular old JB weld. And in 24 hours, you come back, and this will be your perfect cable end to fit inside the yoke that splits the throttle cable assembly. So 24 hours later, here is the completed cylindrical cable stop on the throttle cable. And this has proven to be excellent. This works. I've had the bike all around the neighborhood. I've been continue to try out, make sure the cable snaps back and doesn't jam. I can't really get it to focus here, and there's a lot of reflection, but hopefully you can see that this works. And I believe this is brass, not aluminum, like I said in the previous clip. One of the parts that I had to replace was this. This is the voltage regulator. The TS-250 has a separate rectifier that comes close to the battery, and then later on in the circuit it has this voltage regulator. And I damaged this when I was taking it off, so I had to replace it. And I replaced it with this. This is a Yamaha FS1 voltage regulator that I got from Treatland for about $9. And thank goodness I have a friend at work who's an electrical engineer who also happens to ride two-stroke bikes. And he's the one who figured out that if this has one wire going to it, it's most likely just a resistor. that handles over voltage from the generator. But this seems to work great. I installed this before I kicked the bike back up again, and it works perfectly. So now that the throttle cable was fixed and the engine was obviously up and running and nice and strong, I could turn my attention to some of the cosmetic changes I wanted to make on the bike. So the first thing I looked at was this kind of rear assembly, the rear fender, the rear tail rack and tail light, and the rear signal lights. They all kind of stuck out a little too far. And the look of the bike that I was looking for, that TS-250 seat, again, just a little too bulky for the look I was looking for. The other thing to look at, I don't know if you can notice, but whoever had this before tried to touch up the bike or repaint it a little bit. He got close to the color of the Suzuki red, but it's more of a fire engine orange. And you can see what he did was just kind of hit it with a spray can and didn't mask anything off. So as we go through this video, you'll see areas where there's overspray, there's orange paint on the black frame, and I touched all that up as I was going along. But the first order of business was to deal with this rear fender. The same holds true for the front fender. You can see the front fender has that same mismatched orange-red color, and it is actually mounted kind of high. It's mounted to the frame, to the top of the fork, actually. So it has a high clearance, and again, that's got to go if I want to get the look of the bike that I want to get. And this is the front fender that I chose. It's just a regular knockoff bobber-style front fender from Amazon. Cost about 38 bucks. And it fit perfectly. I had to open up and widen up some of the holes, the two bottom holes there that you see. So moving on to the rear fender, this is the only part that I really had to design and fabricate myself. I did not want to cut the original Suzuki fender, but I knew I wanted kind of a shortened look, a more blunt style rear fender. So had to design this kind of to fit what I wanted it to look like. And what I decided to do was mount my rear fender right to this bar that connects the frame rails. I did not want to cut the frame, as I mentioned earlier, and the fender mounted right to this, and I designed the rear fender to mount right to this. This is the only modification I had to make to the frame. I just drilled 3 new number 8 holes here that don't affect the structure, and again, you can put the bike right back to the way it was. You'd never even know. And to make my rear fender, I just used a piece of 12-inch by 12-inch by 16th thick aluminum that I ordered from Amazon for about $13. This is what I could easily cut and shape in my garage. And I just took my regular old jigsaw, Black & Decker jigsaw, with a very fine tooth metal cutting blade, brand new one, and I just cut along these lines. I cut along the radius at the top to create the rear of the fender, and I cut along the bottom purple lines there to create the part that was closest to the seat. So here is my first pass at the rear fender that's going to be mounted on that bar, and you can see I just kept bending this slightly. You just have to be patient. You keep your gloves on, you bend it, you protect the metal. Just keep bending, fitting until it fits the shape of that bar, which isn't, perfectly, it isn't a perfect radius. You have to just go back and forth a few times. But what I noticed when I put this on the bike, as you see here, when I laid the seat down on the frame, there was a big gap between the bottom edge of the fender and the front edge of the seat. And I didn't want that big air gap. You could just look right through it and see the wires and the tire and everything. So I did have to remake this part. Okay, so you can see here just kind of the rough cut version of the revised fender that I put on here. You can see it has this little section here that contours to the seat. It's going to fill that gap in a little bit as best as I could do, again with just what I have here in the shop. And the only other piece I'm putting on here now, I thought of this halfway through, is a piece to kind of continue the bullet shape of the taillight. And that's this piece. You can see here I'm trying to make a little tab conical section here to kind of fill in the gap behind the square taillight, because it is just a taillight from a trailer. So I'm going to try and mimic a little bit the kind of the bullet shape here that are on the signal lights. It won't be exact, obviously I can't form it around the circle there to make a true bullet, but it'll be a cone, and it'll be a lot better than just the straight taillight. So now that the rear fender was all set, I could move on to mounting the seat. This is the aftermarket seat that I purchased from Amazon. $53. It fits the bike nicely. This is just laid on here right now for the image, so you could see what I was going for. But the next design I had to do was how I was going to mount this seat to the frame without modifying the frame. So to mount the aftermarket seat, you can see here I just fabricated a couple of brackets. These are, again, 1/8 inch steel, just straight bars that you can get from Home Depot for about $8. I fabricated that in the back to mount on the existing studs that came with this seat, and then I mounted this post in the front. This post is going to be the only slide-in feature that I have, and you can see here I made this bracket that's going to mount on the frame of the bike right behind the tank. That fits in here. That's going to slide forward, so that when I do need to remove the seat, I can just undo the back 2 screws that mount this in and take the seat right out. This mounts to the 2 holes here that used to mount the fender. So I just measured that up. There's one on either side, and then there's a couple of other fender mounts, but I only use those 2. That other bracket will fit right here. Turns out there's this extra threaded hole here that nothing seems to go into, so I'm going to mount that here like that, right behind when the tank goes in, and it works pretty well to slide the seat in and out. And you can easily get to these back 2 screws because it's open in the back with the new rear fender design. And here is the finished fender with the seat mounted and the bullet signal lights mounted. Again, I got these bullet signal lights from Amazon, $13 a pair, and the 3-inch diameter tail light was $5 from the auto parts store from a trailer, but it works perfectly and looks nice on the bike. You can see the transitional cone that I built there. And I did have to change how I was going to mount the plate, because I had the plate lower, and when I went off a curb with the bike on a test run, the plate hit the tire, so I mounted that up a little higher now. So you can see this is what the whole rear fender assembly looks like. One side note here is I really didn't want this taillight sticking up this high, but I really had no choice given the clearance I needed for the plate. So you can see here from this image of the bike, this has the first revision fender on it, and it has the taillight in the original position, which is halfway up the fender. And like I said, unfortunately I couldn't keep it like that because the plate hit the wheel. And at some point in the future, I'll probably see if I can put this taillight back to this position and maybe move the license plate to a side mount. But for now, I'm going to leave it as is. And this is the final finished product of that little front cover I made to cover the cables in the front here when I moved the fender that exposed all the cables. I had leftover sheet metal and just bent this up, mounted it to where the old fender used to be mounted, and put the remaining Suzuki logo sticker on there that I had. And I think it kind of completes the front of the bike. The next cosmetic piece that I needed to look at was this nameplate that gets screwed onto the exhaust pipe. And I was thinking about just ordering the 250 logo that goes here, but the cheapest I found it was like $17, and I said, you know, if this is a budget project, maybe I can do something on my own. So I had some leftover aluminum left from making the fender and the front plate, and I said, why don't I just cut out the shape of the sticker, paint it black, and then stencil in, just using masking tape, the 250 logo that's on there. And then once I have the plate stenciled, I can paint it the same burgundy color that is on the tank, and it will be a nice contrast. So it's not picture perfect, but it came out pretty good. Contrast can be seen in the bright light like this, and should be seen in the sunshine pretty nice too. So overall I'm happy with it, and much better than just a Mylar sticker that you get from the internet. Not original, but I like the look. The last cosmetic update I needed to do on this bike was the gas tank. And there are a million gas tank redo videos on YouTube that you can check out. I'm not going to go into how I did this at all. But what I will tell you is, you can't tell from this picture, but the opposite side of the tank was pretty dinged up, and the Suzuki decal was pretty scratched, and there was no way to salvage it or resurrect it in any way, so it all had to come off. And as you can see here, I just bondoed up the dents and smoothed this over as good as I could. And the last point I want to make on the tank is the inside of this tank when I got it was horrible. It was completely rusted, oil and gunk and dirt and sand in it. It took me a long time to clean this tank out. And I don't know where it was or where it sat, but when I derusted the tank, and even when I put gasoline in the tank for the time it sat on my bench till I put it back on the bike, it just completely re-rusted. I attempted this 4 or 5 times. I ended up using this Caswell epoxy to put inside the tank, which I've never done this before, but this is amazing stuff. It is very easy to use. You can go over the surface rust. You just need to get rid of the rusty, flaky parts. And this epoxy cured exactly the way they said it would, and I have clear gas running out of my tank now. So thank you, Caswell. And I wanted to show you guys this, keeping in the spirit of low budget. This is a ketchup container I got from the supermarket for about $3. This became my temporary gas tank. The tubing fits perfectly on there. I just put this on the side of the frame with a wire tie when I needed to run the bike around. So while I was doing all the work on the tank, I used this as my temporary gas tank. And that's it. That is the end of my TS-250 Scrambler conversion. And here is a walk around of the full bike. Total parts bill for this build, including the seat, the lights, the fender, the decals, and the paint, came up to just about $150, which was way more than I thought it would be. But overall, not too bad, considering that the way I did it, you could put this bike back to fully original probably in about a day. Is this a show bike of any kind or a 100-point restoration? No. I mean, that's not why I did it the way I did it. I did this to show that with a little ingenuity and your own home tools, you can get quite a bit done if you just work through it. So thank you very much for watching. I really hope you enjoyed it. I know I had fun doing it.